multi-paddock or AMP grazing and its implications for soil health and for climate change mitigation to be some of the most exciting work that is happening today. Peter is at the School of Sustainability and Journalism at Arizona State. He currently coordinates this amazing group of over 20 scientists from across the country who are working on a project called Soil Carbon Cowboys. Peter's own artistic contribution to this work is the filming of documentaries on many ranches, and I can say as one of the ranches he's visited that it is both incredibly uplifting to have him with you and exhausting. Richard is a professor of ecosystem science and management at Texas A&M, and for decades he was the lone scientific voice crying in the wilderness about regenerative practices on the land and the benefits that can accrue from them. He is particularly concerned with the economic viability of ranching, and for that, God bless him. Thank you, you two.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? Okay, first a big thank you to the organizers and the invitation. This is a crowd that I love to be with, and it's just great to be back again. In these circles, regenerative is well known and respected, but the rest of agriculture thinks it's sustainable as great. It's not. It's absolutely inappropriate because we've degraded just about every environment we're in, so we need to regenerate ecosystem function in order to regenerate the net wealth of the farmers. So the good news is there are many good regenerative ranches through North America, and we have the privilege of working with many of them to document what they're achieving and develop the science that explains why they're getting these superior ecological and economic results. So our team goal is to use a system science, aka holistic science, to look at how things fit together on the whole of the unit that you're managing. And we use a multidisciplinary framework within that systems view to regenerate those particular items that drive everything. Now, what I've found, I've been at this game for 50 years. I was a schoolboy when Alan Savory started in Africa. The outstanding managers around the world are 20 or 30 years ahead of the academics, with very few exceptions. So, to my mind, those examples that they set and what we can learn from them is a very solid foundation for helping farmers in the many different areas. Now, most current science aims less at understanding the biology and ecology than achieving maximum yields, killing pests with biocides, and maximizing profit selling solutions, all of which has created many unintended consequences. And these are the things that they have eliminated from their deliberations and studies, and they're absolutely essential. We live in ecosystems that are changing all the time. If you've read Charles Massey's book, The Call of the Reed Warbler, you'll understand he outlays it very well there. So our research and framework is that carbon soil is healthy soil, and everything good pertains to that. Not only is having high carbon level in the soil very important, but when you are managing to improve it, you avoid things that are causing damage, and you use things that are improving the ecological function of the biota that drives our ecosystems. So these are the particular elements that our research so far has indicated are improved with improved AMP grazing. And I must say at this point, AMP grazing, all of the folk we work with use holistic plan grazing. We just didn't want to be labeled with the vitriol that's been hammered at Alan So we've used AMP grazing with good results so far. So the other thing we do is we work with leading farmers because it gives us the opportunity of doing whole system research on their farms and developing the synergies, understanding the synergies involved. And also, we know that because they've achieved good results, their management is tip-top. Most science gets managed for people to produce a paper from. It doesn't understand in order to achieve desirable goals. There's a big difference between those things. So this is what distinguishes our research from most research that's been done. The other thing they do to succeed, the regenerative farmers, is they adaptively manage as seasons change. And our research shows that that has many benefits, ranging from 20 to 80% improvements. So the initial work that we did in Texas, before we started this project, the AMP grazing had higher carbon gains in the soil per year than the surrounding continuously grazed paddocks, to the extent of 3 tons of carbon per year more. So now we want to find out what happens further north where it's cooler, further west where it's drier, and further east where it's wetter. So we've done reconnaissance sampling, Peter having got us a lot of research money to do this, and those are the figures that we've come up with in a reconnaissance way. Now that's not published data, but we've gone out and measured it to show proof of concept to try and get people to fund us for the next step. Now we know that this isn't exact because we relied on management for many years prior, and we've done fence-sliced contrasts. One of the things we started doing is measuring the CO2 isotope content, which on a daily basis will measure exactly how much carbon is being sequestered. And our initial measures, as you can see from there, are exactly in line with the figures we've been measuring in our farm-to-farm. So the scientists, when they look at the figures we're coming up with, they say, that's ridiculous, you must be jimmying these results. Basically, you're dishonest and you're lying. I'll tell you why we're not. Before 1800s, that's where the carbon level used to be. After our management, over 2 centuries or so, they've gone down. Regenerative grazing, we've located the guys throughout the country, and I'll show you throughout North America who we've been working with. It's actually raised significantly, and we don't know where it's going to stop. We know that it's still going up in many of the places we're working with. The scientists, in contrast to our research, have been measuring to 8 or 12 inches. We are measuring to 1 meter or 1.5 meters, and we believe that we are getting a much better idea of the amount that we can sequester due to improved management. So there's an idea of the people that we'll be having continuous feedback with right around North America. So what we need to know is causal mechanisms. We've seen certain things. Now we want to know, okay, if this is producing more than that, why? So the causal mechanisms are what we're concentrating on. And from our initial observations, So in the bottom left-hand corner there, you'll see the 4 ecosystem functions: the capture of energy, healthy water cycle, mineral cycling, and plant diversity to drive them. What we've seen is the AMP grazing, short period of grazing, adequate recovery, has the highest improvements in each one of those functions. That's why we're getting superior results. Top right, light continuous grazing, you can see straight off they're not capturing as much sunlight as they could, because the animals are there all the time, they're eating away the desirable plants, so your biodiversity and your productive plants are disappearing. Bottom left, no grazing. You can see there, dominated by big blue stem and little blue stem. Very good, but there's nothing else. So there's no energy fixation at all. And continuous grazing, as you can see, that causes a lot of trouble, erosion, etc. So what we're doing in the map of the US there, you see 5 little red dots. At each one of those, we've got a continuous grazed neighbor and a AMP grazer, and we're comparing between them at each of those locations. You'll see a little green circle at the top of the Great Plains. That's the next step in our research. And we've outlined there the soil carbon, infiltration, vegetation. Those are all the things we're measuring now and in our project. But over and above that, these are the questions we're asking. Does AMP grazing improve the function of soil biota, ecosystem biodiversity, and the farmer livelihoods and well-beings? And we've got those 20 scientists working with us, covering 12 different disciplines, in order to examine those and see if our explanation of the causal mechanisms is actually correct. So these are the things we found already that we are testing at the same time, that ecological function and profitability increase with an increasing number of paddocks. And more importantly, international research has backed up what we've done and found out not only does the economics improve, but the stability of returns from year to year improves enormously with the increasing number of paddocks you've got, just because it gives you better flexibility. So the other things, short periods of grazing with adequate recovery, greatest profit and ecological return. Adjusting management is hugely important. Fixed management protocols reduce your benefits, even if you've got everything else right, they will reduce your benefits by between 20 and 80%, because seasons change and you've got to change, otherwise you pay. And in the grazing, if you graze too short or too long in a different environment, you're going to run into trouble. So the eye of the manager and the manager having the right goals is essential to managing properly. And those of you who are doing it will understand that that is the case. And stocking rates can be increased without damaging ecological function. You heard one of our folk this morning increasing up to 8-fold. Increasing up to 3- or 4-fold is common with the people we work with, and we are working with many people who are 6x ahead. So, I'm going to turn it over to Peter now. One of the things that science has not done very well is making the right information available to farmers. They produce papers and things and just throw it at the farmer and say, this is what it is. That's not the right way to go. We have to partner with the people who are managing the land in order to learn together. And that's what we're doing. Now, what Peter's doing is he's an expert filmmaker. So he is filming all the research we're doing, our interactions with individual farmers, with our scientists, and he's producing it into an educational documentary. And now I'll turn it over to him.
Thanks, Richard. Hello. Hello, everybody. Excuse me. This is on. Yes. Am I on? Yes. Hello, hello, hello. What Richard's just been talking about is the scientific basis for what we're working on. So we've got, I think it's 23 scientists now from Colorado State, Michigan State, University of Arkansas, University of Illinois, Arizona State, New Mexico State, some private companies, USDA. These are all folks that are on our team, and I'm sort of the wrangler of the science team. And one of the things we're doing on purpose is we're going to big companies to raise money for this funding, because I think they should be paying for this funding. And so McDonald's was our first funder. They got us a grant for $4.5 million as a matching grant. And then the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, which is really money from the USDA, matched $1.25 million. And then we've got some other companies, Wrangler, Timberland, and we just signed with Exxon last week. We just closed that deal. And my comment to the energy people are, by using your product, we've all put carbon up in the atmosphere. Why don't you all use our profits and help us do the research to see if this stuff is really real? And as we find the data, if we find that the AMP grazing, what you all are doing, is truly drawing down enormous amounts of carbon, which we think it is, and that it's more carbon, that it's actually taking more carbon down than whatever the methane coming from the animals would be putting up, so the greenhouse gas equivalent, we think it's either a lot better or it's a greenhouse gas sink. That's what we're looking for. If that's the case, then we can really push this information out and scale up. That was one of the things that McDonald's was really interested in, was how are you going to scale? And so, Alan Williams is our guru on this team as far as AMP grazing is concerned. And The idea of how do we talk to farmers about potentially changing the way they're doing things. What an incredibly difficult conversation that can be. And so we've made a lot of films about the folks who are doing really cool stuff. And you can see all of the films we've made so far at soilcarboncowboys.com. So that's soilcarboncowboys.com. And you all saw Deborah Clark yesterday morning. We're just finishing up the film that we did at their ranch. So that'll be done hopefully before the end of the year, hopefully. What I'd love to do now is really open up to questions, and we can have a conversation. You guys could ask us the questions you're thinking. The reason that I came into this was because of climate change. I made a movie called Carbon Nation. It's about solutions to climate change. Our tagline is a climate change solutions movie that doesn't even care if you believe in climate change. And that worked really well with my Uncle Phil and other folks who aren't worried about climate change. And we wanted to make the case that it doesn't matter what you think about climate change. Saving energy, using half the energy to make a cold beer or using twice the amount of energy to make a cold beer, you're still going to have the same cold beer. Why don't you use half the energy? Doesn't that make sense? And we found a lot of really cool stories along those lines, but it was the soil that got my attention. And it was the grazing within the soil story that really got my attention. And so in 2013, this science team that we've got started formulating. And so we've been designing this project that just got up on its feet for real this spring since 2014, since early 2014. It's taken time. And what I've learned in the making of all these short films is I'm now just as much in it for the farmers and ranchers as I am for the planet. I think our soils are in really dangerous shape right now, and I think what you all are doing is actually, I think, if not the only way to rejuvenate and regenerate those soils, it's one of the most powerful ways to rejuvenate and regenerate those soils. So my job that I've given myself and people have said okay is to get the stories out there about what really good land management looks like. And I have friends who are vegans, and I say that's great. You should only eat what you want to eat, but you want these animals grazing on the land where we're producing your vegetables and your fruits, because that's the way the soil is going to get as powerful as it can be. It's the way it's going to get your food as nutrient dense as it can be. And so we're getting this message out on a lot of different fronts. And the last thing I'll say is, not the last thing I'll say, believe me, but the next thing I'll say is that with the companies we're working with, we had worked with Shell Oil for a number of years. Now they're affiliated with us. They're funding research to test greenhouse gases with the University of Exeter, but they've asked to put that equipment on the land that Richard showed you that we're doing in the southeast. So now we're in an affiliation with them. And what we've said all along is your company is going to be stronger if you understand how much soil health is tied into your company's bottom line. And so what my goal is right now is to show companies, big companies, that soil health is essential for them, for their resilience, for their bottom line, for how successful their company is going to be in the next decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades. And it's starting to resonate. It's not an overnight thing, but that message is starting to resonate. And that puts everyone in this room who's in production in the driver's seat, because you all are doing the work that needs to be done. Just a lot of companies don't know it yet. Doesn't mean it doesn't need to be done. Just means they don't know it yet. And so that's our job, is to make sure they do find out. And they're listening. They really are listening. Let's go for some questions. Oh, there we go.
Richard and Peter, the question I have is what's the economic data that translates from that increased soil carbon and even in the stocking rates and that kind of thing? Where have you been seeing things on that front?
Yeah, so we've got a film called I Sell Water and Sunshine. It's in Missouri. Our website is just a map of the U.S. You just tap on the states. And Doug Peterson, we filmed him there. And through mistakes he made, he realized that he could actually be running his animals in one herd and have a short impact on the land and let it rest for a while. And he doubled his forage production in a very short amount of time. And the way he describes it is he just got a farm for free. And so that sounds like good economic sense to me. What Richard was talking about is we're seeing folks double, triple, quadruple their carrying capacity on the same land with the same rainfall. So that would be economic news. And we're asking all our farmers as much economic detail as they'll give us. Now that falls on the shoulders of Dr. Jenny Hodbot out of Michigan State. And so wish her luck. That's going to be a hard question to get all the answers we want, but the financial information is really important. Richard, you want to add?
As you guys, many of you are farmers yourself, it's notoriously difficult to get financial data from farmers. Do you get the stuff you send to the IRS or to your banker, or the stuff that you know about that's different? So they're very careful about letting these things go. So we're going to have a lot of biological understanding to do what-if scenarios, like a lot of those publications that I addressed, to actually do theoretical analyses and just check with the farmers who've achieved a lot to see if, in fact, how much financial gain, net financial gain, they're getting from their progress.
One of the things that I've come across in all the filming we've done over the last 5 years, getting on 6 years, is the folks that are doing holistic management, AMP grazing, they're alone, they're out in front, like Richard was out in front with science, they've got arrows in their chest, as they say, the pioneers get the arrows, and their neighbors think they're crazy. That's what I've heard. And then when we've spoken to other folks who don't want to try a new way of grazing, even if they're seeing green grass across the fence and they don't have green grass, they don't want people to talk about them in town, and there's a reticence there. But what I've found in the research we're doing, so we're in Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi with the research we're doing. And just to reiterate what Richard said, we've got the AMP farmer on one side of a fence and we've got the continuous grazer on the other side of the fence. And one of the requirements we had was the AMP farmer has to have a good relationship with their neighbor, because we have to do the study on both sides of that fence, and to make it as apples to apples as possible. So we've met some amazing people on both sides of the fence, and I'm filming, I've been around these farms for the last 6 months a lot. And what I found was the neighbors who are doing continuous grazing don't think the AMP farmers are crazy. They're very curious about what's going on. They're watching as much as they can from the road, and they're too polite to ask. And what I've found from the AMP farmers is they wish their neighbors would want to know more, but they're too polite to tell. And that finding that I got into the last few months, I think is an enormous opportunity. I think it's a fantastic opportunity. Because, yeah, we're scientists and filmmakers and stuff like that, but we are human beings with hearts. And I can just tell you very clearly, I think it's ridiculous that people who produce our food and teach our children don't make a good living. I think it's nuts. And so, yeah, I would have applauded if someone else said it and I was in the audience. And I want farmers to do well. And the only way I can see farmers doing well is if they're giving someone else a lot less money and they're taking a lot more from nature. It just seems like nature's got much more of an answer than anybody. As Janine Benyus says, it's 3.2 billion years of R&D. Why not start with that? As Russ Conser says, why not let nature have a seat at the table? And that to me makes a lot of sense. And so our science is to see what that seat at the table looks like. When we measure the bugs above and below ground, we measure the soil microbial life, the fungi, the bacteria, measure the greenhouse gases coming in and out of the system, that's CO2, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide. We're measuring how well the animals are doing, how's their health. We're measuring the well-being of the farmers in a lot of metrics. We're measuring the soil carbon content. We're measuring a lot of other soil health mechanisms. Richard's leading the way on the plant forage production, and then Michigan State saying how nutrient dense that forage is. We're doing a lot of measurements. Birds. Where are the breeding birds landing? You saw the Audubon table out there, and I hope you tried some of the beef sticks. I'm going to take 6 of them before I leave. You know, they've got a bird-friendly beef program. Birds kind of know where they want to be. I trust a bird to tell me where the healthier spot to land is. And they're landing on your all's farms. Thank you, birds. There was a question over here, I think. Oh, no. I thought I saw a mic
Could I just
floating
make
around.
a comment?
Oh, Richard. Yeah.
I'd like to comment further on the economics. Those of you who've been in holistic management for a while, a lot of your success is because you found innovative ways of structuring your business, bringing in different layers, bringing in some members of the family who come in, and actually gaining advantages that way, as well as improving, decreasing your input costs. So we've actually got to consider some of those things to see where a lot of the sensitivity lies. And we're learning a lot from the successful ranchers in doing that. And in that way, we can actually help the people who are more conservative actually just bring in things like that to start improving. The other thing we've noticed is the early adopters have courage. They like to try things out. Most people are very risk averse. So what we're doing now with many people is saying, just take a small portion of your farm, like Gabe Brown did, and just say, try this out. And the educators, HM and Savory educators, are doing similar things. Just try this out so you get a feel for it and actually work from that base. So it's easy to reach 5 or 10% of the population, but to get to the other guys who are more risk averse and less innovative, we're going to have to help them a little bit more. And that's going to come out of our study too.
And one of the things we're thinking about is something we're calling ranch transition finance, where there's a loan given to someone who wants to change, who needs to put the electrical stuff in, get the solar-powered batteries going for the electric fence, maybe start looking at different breeds of the animals. A 3 to 5 year loan that gets paid back only if the profit's going up, and the loan gets paid back from that delta of where your profits have increased after that 3 to 5 year period. And I haven't done a whole lot of work on that, but when I've spoken to a couple folks at different big banks, they think it makes sense. So that's another way we're looking this, to help people get through that risk of change.
What's the exact methodology? You have a
I'll repeat the question.
what's the exact methodology? You have a control and the amp field, and you're looking over a period of time, or are you also have an amp field and taking what you learned from the data and applying it to a continuous graze field to see if you can apply those principles?
So the question's about methodology. We have an amp ranch or regular farm. Are we doing this over a period of time? Do we have a control field?
So that's a very good question. The control is the norm for that particular area, and the neighbor is the amp operator. And because the major parameter that we're looking at, carbon, changes so slowly, for the environment there has to be adequate time for differences to develop statistically. So in those instances, it's 5 years. We've got data on that. Where I did it in Texas, it required 10 years. Where Nancy has been operating, it's probably going to require 30 years just because it's dry, so much drier. But that's why you need to look at the causal mechanisms, because on Nancy, although we're only seeing an increase in 2.5 tons, there's less bare ground, the plants are closer together, all the dominant species are there in that dry country, so everything is moving forward. In time it should result in that, but it's going to take a long time in those very dry environments. So that's the basic outline.
But another piece of this puzzle is the time is how long the people have been doing their practice before we show up.
Yeah.
So in the southeast where we're working, most of the AMP farmers have been doing it for 20 to 30 years. One guy's about 7 years in his field. And the conventional folks have been doing it for that or longer, or much longer. So that's the time. And we're coming in and taking a snapshot. But we also have what we're calling a reference natural area that hasn't been grazed, that's semi-untouched, as untouched as we can find in the United States. And it's hard. It is hard to find a piece of land that's a grassland that hasn't been touched by humans in a very destructive way, especially in the southeast because of cotton farming and things like that. But there's a couple of natural areas, land owned by logging companies, that we're also measuring some of our metrics on just to get a sense of what's going on if there was no grazing in that area. So those are the three kind of pieces.
One of the things we didn't encounter in Texas was the effect of topography. As soon as we went across the Mississippi, a lot of those Appalachian areas there, 20% slopes that they used to grow tobacco and cotton and stuff on it. So the loss of soil there has been horrendous. And you can see it. You take a core on this ranch on the other side, and you can see all the horizons are there, but they're that deep, the A on the one side, and that deep on the other side. And that is a direct result of the management that has been applied.
Yes, sir.
That is a very big difference because
And we're measuring that. On a lot of our metrics, we're measuring spring, summer, and fall.
yeah,
So we'll be measuring, your forage production you're measuring in 3.
Yeah.
The bugs are being measured in all 3 seasons.
as part of the grazing plan, you plan the main growing season and then the secondary growing season, so you have a separate plan for both. But the guys who are doing that to maximize the number of green days that they've got are actually putting more carbon in the ground. That's the energy that's driving it. And it's noticeable if you start green measurements for the continuous guy, it's a good month after the guys on the AMP grazing have actually already got production and green on the ground, which changes the nutrition for the cows as well as the overall productivity. And we expect to see the same going into fall, that there'll be a longer season altogether with the planned grazing.
Richard will be measuring in 2 weeks his fall measurements
Yeah.
of all the forage production. Was there another question? Yes, sir. And he's got a mic.
Thanks, Richard. Brilliant presentation. Peter, New Mexico has a non-professional citizen legislature that will meet next time in January, and they will consider several bills having to do with soil health. And my question for you, Peter, is who is the target audience of your films?
Everyone. Any filmmaker is going to tell you they're making their film for everybody. You know, even the Sesame Street folks want grandparents to watch their show. I'm not being facetious, though. I want everyone to see these films. I want everyone to understand where their food's produced, because so many people don't. Now, would it be great if these were educational tools for the non-professional legislators that you have here in New Mexico? Heck yeah. And they're free and they're up and anyone can use them. The website I gave you is a sneak preview to something that we're going to be pushing out in a bigger way in the next 6 months, but they're yours. You know, we're a 501c3. The IRS said yes to making these films, and we're saying it's a gift to everybody because the farmers are a gift to us. So as many people as possible. And
Peter's
Will
giving you the
Harris
right
wants
answer.
his film to be seen by more people than any of the other
Because
films, just to say it.
The traditional model is the scientists tell the government, okay, that then fool around with policy, much of which is entirely negative. Okay, so you can't work with government. Government's not going to do anything. They're just totally loggerheaded. You've got to inform the people who are buying so that they know and they purchase accordingly. That is the only thing that's going to move things forward.
And I can tell you that the consumers with McDonald's are pushing McDonald's.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. And now the investors are pushing McDonald's. They are getting very, very, very many investors saying, what are you doing for the environment? Because otherwise we can't invest in you. It's a real thing. It's really happening. There was a lady back there. Yep.
The map that you showed in your presentation,
Yes.
I would like to see that one again at some point in time, not right now.
If
And
you
then-
go to our website, you'll see a research button, and you'll see
Okay,
maps
thank
very
you.
similar to that.
Okay, and then the gentleman that talked about the legislature and the bills that are being entertained, where are you so I can see you? Okay, do you know when they're meeting? I know that, but who are you talking to there? I would be interested in working with that. Okay?
Well, let's
All
get
right.
you guys hooked up. Do you have a question for Richard
And then,
or
I'm
me?
sorry, well, these are, because it's so vast. And then the other thing is, what is the name of your website where we can get all this information you're talking about?
soilcarbon.cowboys.com.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Yes, ma'am. We have 5 minutes, and so we're going to do it.
recommend for scientists and advocates and land managers to help get
So what resources do we suggest for farmers and land managers to get your message out? To the producers, to get your stories out. Well, you know, I hadn't thought of this before, but if you guys have some videos, we'll post them on our site, send them up. Just do info@soilcarboncowboys.com and we'll get them. If you've got stuff, we'll help you get it out. Happy to.
There's quite a few popular magazines, ag ones, that have got individuals reporting in them that actually cover things very well. And whenever we've got a new bit of science coming along, we shunt it in their direction.
And if you happen to be wearing Timberland boots or Wrangler jeans, they'll want to look at your stuff too.
But the interesting thing is, if you go to YouTube, there's an enormous amount of stuff there, covering in a lot of detail by many really competent people. Yes, but you can draw people's attention and ask them to facilitate getting your information out. You've got to be proactive in these things. So if you get together as a group or go through these folk, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Richard, I'd like to ask you, you know, we live in a very different environment and wildlife is a massive consideration in any scientific studies that are done. How is wildlife considered in the studies that you do, i.e. other animals?
Wildlife is an intrinsic part of the planning that you do as a land manager. And holistic management and ranching for profit, they've got a means of doing so. At the moment, it's a little peripheral, with the exception of birds. Now, we're looking at birds because they're relatively easy to study in a relatively small area, and they're great indicators for ecosystem function. That and insects. So it's entirely at that level. Otherwise, we'd need a hell of a lot more money to do it and more scientists, which we haven't got. But those are good indicators of habitat for wildlife generally.
The insects and the birds. But I'll just tell you, one of the farmers, I was just on his land 2 days ago, and he seeds with a cocktail mix right now for winter. And he was saying that, you know, as soon as they come up, he'll see deer eating it. And I said, are you happy it's deer season? He goes, no, I want them to eat it. I'm glad they're here. But I'm sure there's a balance, just like with Will Harris's place with the bald eagles. It was cool when they showed up, and then it's been not so cool that they stayed.
Another example, we've just visited, we showed the McDonald's hierarchy, one of the ranchers we were working with in Mississippi, southeast Mississippi. And they used to do a lot of quail hunting and stuff like that, and for 2 decades, they haven't had any quail at all. And the people we're working with, the last 2 years or so, the quail have just blossomed because they're bringing back all the native grasses, the taller native grasses, the habitat and stuff, the cycling, the insects and stuff are just blooming, and they're coming back. So, I mean, restoration, yeah.
And their neighbor, who's the continuous grazer, he's a quail hunter. He has a kennel of quail dogs, and he has to drive to Texas or North Mississippi to hunt. He's really interested in figuring out what he can do with his land that would bring the quail back. Perfect way to start this conversation. Yeah. It's really, really, really inspiring to me. Yes, sir. Yeah, it's just a question of finance, and it's a question of resource. It's money. And so our choice as a science team was to do the Southeast U.S. as our first region. Our second choice was to do the Upper Great Plains. Our third choice was to do the Upper Midwest, and our fourth choice was to do the Southwest. And so we would love to do a study in this area. We just don't have the funding yet. But if there were a group of people who wants this study to happen in the Arizona, New Mexico area, I'm sure our team could come up with a really cool plan.
There's no reason to limit us doing the research.
And
if
Nancy can be our lead. I'm sorry, Richard. The hook for McDonald's, what's the hook for the companies is the question. The hook for Shell was, you've got a big carbon problem, and it's incredibly expensive to store carbon the way you're doing it at $150 a ton. How about helping ranchers do these methods of grazing where they're doing it for a profit, and if you paid them $10 a ton of CO2 annually per acre per year, they might be interested. So it's just a delta of savings for the energy companies. And again, their shareholders are pushing hard on what are they doing about carbon. So Shell now speaks about nature-based solutions because of our work. Their CEO made a speech last November. For McDonald's, it's their customers want to know where the food's coming from, so the story of the farmers, just like yours, and a resilient supply chain. If the land is not healthy, the supply chain's not solid. If the soil is in great shape, their supply chain is much more solid. And that is a real concern, and that is something they're very, very focused on. And we showed up at the time where they were looking. It was good timing. 5-year overnight success. Yes, sir. Are we done?
Increasingly, I get the question I get from my neighbors is, what about the elk and deer? They think I'm crazy because increasing paddocks typically means for me more electric fence, which I'm experimenting with. I'm not scared of it. It doesn't bug me to put this stuff up, and if it gets torn down, it gets torn down. But what advice do you give to folks in the Rocky Mountain region or other areas that are worried about the larger wildlife crashing their fence?
You mean, so you're seeing elk and deer literally tear down your electric fence that you've set up for temporary paddocks?
I've got a lot of folks that are questioning my use of them because they think that it's just going to be torn down.
Okay, well, what they think versus what is happening. Are you seeing it on your land?
We see fence that's down, but I think about 50% of the time it's because I've made a mistake and wasn't listening to the cow when it told me it was time to move.
Right,
But there may very well be animals that are crashing the fence, but I think it's a 50-50.
Listen to your cows. It's a new T-shirt. I would just say that if you're not having that experience, then you're not. If you hear a lot of what ifs and worries, and it's going to be a lot more work and all those things. The truth of it is, it's not a lot more work. It's just different job during the day, right? I would love to hear more about that story, though. We've been told there's no more time, so I think that's it. So you've got me, you've got Richard, and just because he's here, you've got David Johnson, right? Stand up, David. So we're 3 of those 23 scientists. So, we're around. We'll answer, talk, and chat, and learn. I'm learning. So Richard, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Squire.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, I think it's fantastic that these 3 groups got together for this conference. I just think it's, yes.